Hi, Ted Morrissey here, and I just want to do a quick video about one of the, I think, most important elements to understand regarding getting your writing published, and that is persistence. We certainly want to spend quality time working on our writing, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, poetry, dramatic writing, whatever it is. We want to spend quality time to make it as good as possible. We want to look for the right places to send it, whether that's an agent, whether that's a publisher, whether that's an editor of a journal. And we want to follow those guidelines that are given to us by the agent or the publisher or the journal, and make sure we're following them specifically. I've talked about that too, because that's very important. But ultimately, once you do all that, it comes down to just a matter of mathematics, because journal editors, agents, publishers, as I've said before, they are just inundated with manuscripts, with queries, with whatever. And so the odds are against us getting things accepted, not because the work is bad or because we've somehow missed the ball in terms of where we need to send it, but just because they get thousands and thousands, tens of thousands. I read recently, Poetry Magazine says they get about 150,000 poems submitted to them every year, of which just a tiny fraction are accepted for publication. But most journals, even ones you hardly have ever heard of, get thousands of submissions. And so they're taking 1%, less than 1% of the submissions is pretty typical. So if you just send your work to one or two places and then sit back and wait to hear from them, yes, it can work. Obviously, maybe you hit the jackpot, and an editor you find is amenable to what you're doing. Hang on, dog wants in. Okay, back. So you find a sympathetic editor. They like what you're doing. They publish your work. Yes, sometimes that can happen, but that's unusual. Normally, you've got to try and try and try again. I'm sure you've all heard stories of really famous works that were rejected and rejected and rejected, whether it's Dr. Seuss's first book, which went through 36 different publishers until one said yes. In the music biz, there's all sorts of examples of musicians and bands that can't get a label for years until they finally do. I'll point out that my own beloved William Gass, his now classic novella, The Peterson Kid, he spent a solid decade trying to get that published, sending it out again and again and again, and it was rejected again and again and again, until finally, after about 10 years, he found an editor who was wanting to publish it. So it can take a long time. So again, I wouldn't just send to one or two places. I would just send it out there in mass. Now, you need to make sure you're sending it to places that are okay with that, and just about all places are now. They're fine with simultaneous submissions, it's called, so you can send the same piece to multiple editors. It's just that you have to make sure that if it gets accepted, that you contact all those other places immediately to withdraw your story or poem or manuscript or whatever it is, novel-length manuscript, so that they know not to spend more time looking at it and so forth. Now, there are some journals, some agents who want exclusive, that's the key term, exclusive opportunity to read your work before you send it to anybody else. And if that's the case, then yes, you need to just send it to them. You need to, in your cover letter, make clear that you understand this is an exclusive submission, and you're going to, wait to hear from them before you send it to anybody else. And usually those kinds of places, what kind of the deal is, maybe the unstated deal, or sometimes it's stated, that if they're demanding it be an exclusive submission, and they're the only ones looking at whatever it is, they also are agreeing to be pretty quick about it. It would be very poor, poor taste to say they want to be the only one looking at a particular piece, and then they take 6 months to a year to get back to you. Meanwhile, that's been out of circulation all this time. So most places, and by most I mean 90-some%, if not nearly 100%, they allow simultaneous submissions. You can send it to multiple places. So hang on one second again. So I've told this story on my podcast and probably in other videos, but early in my writing life, I really hadn't published much, but I had continued to write short stories and wasn't really sending them out. I had started to work on my PhD, so my focus was kind of shifted. So I had kind of all these short stories that I really hadn't been sending anywhere for a long time, but I decided, what, I need to kind of get back in the game. So I developed this sort of, ritual, I guess, where, I'd send out a story to a bunch of places, maybe 10 or 12 places. But as soon as the story was rejected by one of them, within 24 hours, I sent it to 6 other places. So when I'd get a rejection, I would immediately find 6 more places to send that story, and I'd get it out into the world, usually within 24 hours. Sometimes it took maybe a day or 2 longer than that, but that was the goal. And, I might get 2 or 3 rejections in a week, quite honestly. And so each of those resulted in 6 more submissions going out. So in a given week, I might send out 12 or 18, pieces to different editors. And those eventually started to come home to roost. I started to get acceptances. And I mentioned that when I went to the AWP conference, that's the big writing and publishing conference in Chicago in, I think it was 2009, when I went into the great hall where all the journals and publishers are, I think I counted 8 different booths, where literary journals were set up, where I had a piece in one of the journals sitting on their table because I had just covered all these different areas. So I sent out dozens and dozens and dozens of stories. At that time, it was short stories I was writing. And eventually, 9 of them, actually a little more than that, but it was only 9 in the great hall there, I got picked up. Was I like a super great writer destined for, the Nobel Prize? No. I was just persistent. I was just getting my work out there and getting it in more editors' inboxes, and eventually finding enough, that they liked it and they would publish it. So, bottom line here is, get your work out there, but don't just send it to 1 or 2 places. As long as you're at it, send it to multiple places. It's important to keep track, right? Make sure that you know where you're sending stuff, what you're sending to them, so that if something gets accepted or when something gets accepted, you can easily see, okay, I need to contact journals X, Y, and Z and withdraw that piece because it's going to be coming out in another place. And so you send them a little note and you say, I always say something like, I apologize for the inconvenience, but I need to withdraw piece X because it's been accepted elsewhere. Thank you. That's it, pretty much. And oftentimes I'll get a little note from the editor congratulating me on having had the piece accepted elsewhere. So it's not an annoyance to them. It's, they are pulling for you, right? So definitely do that. All right, I'm going to stop there. I don't want this to be too long. And so keep writing, keep sending your work out.